Dai 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 da dai dai da da dai dai da da. Ai dai dai da dai dai da 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 da. Ai dai 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 da dai 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 da da dai 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 da dai 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 da da dai dai da. Ai hoi dai da dai dai ha da dai dai da da. Ai dai dai da dai dai da dai 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 da da da. Ai dai dai hai dai dai da da hai dai dai da da dai 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 da. Da dai 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 da da dai dai da.
Shana Tova. If two men are laughing at each other, nobody gets stabbed. This is a brilliant quote by a brilliant comedian named Godfrey Cambridge. Anybody here remember Godfrey Cambridge? It's okay, I'm not going to actually make you prove how old you are to remember him. Unfortunately, Godfrey Cambridge, who was an amazing black comedian in the 1960s, passed away on set when he was slated to be Idi Amin in Victory on Entebbe, and died at a very young age. But I grew up having browsed through all of the random records in my grandparents' home. You remember what records are, right? It's okay, good. They're like YouTube broadcasts or podcasts, but on a disc. It's kind of weird. And this is before we had YouTube or podcasts, so you put on the record player whatever was in the house. And it just so happened that my mother had left to her parents a copy of one of his records. So I grew up with Godfrey Cambridge on the record player. And there was a skit that has stuck with me to this day, which is now going on 40-some years, where he describes having arrived at the airport and getting into an elevator. And if you haven't seen Godfrey Cambridge, especially at the time where he was doing this stand-up routine, he was a largish man, which he made fun of quite often, so I don't feel like I am embarrassing him by pointing this out. And so he says, you get to the airport, the elevator doors open up, and he is standing there, and there's a white man standing next to him, and they both step forward, and they bump into each other, and immediately they step back. And the white man says, no, 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 after you. And Godfrey Cambridge says, no, 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 after you. No, 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 after you. No, 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 after you. And the white man says, no, 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 after you. Because Godfrey Cambridge says he knows in his heart that he does not want to do anything to increase the burning resentment that is smoldering within this man next to him, who surely must resent all the crimes that have been committed against him and his people for hundreds of years. And Godfrey Cambridge, on the other hand, is thinking to himself, he does not want to disparage the man who is clearly an ally and a friend and is reaching out to try and reconcile all of the problems that have been, and to be impolite or rude would only drive him into the arms of extremists. By which point the elevator had left. Trust me, he does a better job of it than I do. And there's a certain rhythm to that. Of when we get caught up in our head, when we get caught up in our mind of, I am going to say this because I imagine that person is thinking this and they're imagining me thinking that there's a certain delay that falls into our life where we lose sight of what is actually meant to be the heart of the exchange, the heart of the conversation, the heart of the meeting of two people. What do we say for Rosh HaShanah? What is our greeting? Shana Tova, Umetuka, Ubracha. You should have a good new year, a sweet new year, a blessed new year, a year of happiness, a year of peace, a year of joy, a year of health, a year of wealth, of prosperity, a year of simchas. There is a certain escalation, an arms race of greetings that has happened over the last 2 years in particular. In our desperation throughout all of the crises that we have faced, we keep piling up more and more and more to Shana Tova, to this simple greeting. It's almost as though wishing someone a good new year isn't good enough, that we need to reflect that if I offer you a good new year, perhaps you think that I'm only offering you a mediocre new year. Perhaps I need to point out that it shouldn't be only a good year, it should also be a sweet year. And for you to think that sweetness is not sufficient, then I also want to double down and say it should be your blessing. But of course, with COVID going on, I have to mention health, because if I didn't mention health, does that mean I'm wishing that you would get sick? Of course not, I have to mention health. And if I mention health, well, the economy's also been bad, so I have to mention prosperity too, but I don't want to sound too greedy, so then I also have to say a meaningful year. You can see that we get inside our own head in our panic, in our desperation of seeking blessing for the new year. But Tov, it's not so bad. It's not so bad. If you look over here on our beautiful ark, what does God say about creation? Maybe you can't see it from all the way back there. It's Tov. God makes the world and calls it Tov. It's good. It's good. God doesn't say the world is Tov and matok and sweet and blessed and rich and healthy. God just says the world is good. If it's good enough for God, it's kind of good enough for us. So where does that impulse come, that desperate need for the litany of additional blessings that we want to cram into our greetings and wishes at this time? Some of the high holiday cards I've gotten this year are like, my length of my arm with all of the things they want to wish me, which I appreciate and love. But it's also very representative of a human urge, which is not always the most ideal. You see, when we take good, when we take tov, or tova, remember the inflection from Hebrew, tov and tova are the same word, and we break it into its component facets. We break it into sweetness and joy and health and wealth and all of those pieces. We are actually recreating the process that leads to idolatry. Because we are taking that which is unified and whole, that which is good, and we are now putting it through the prism to see all of the different bands of goodness within it, all the different colors that come out of that prism, and then labeling each of them. And then we begin to make a hierarchy, a structure, a framework of which ones are we wishing for most, which ones are we most desperate for at the moment. And once I know which one I'm most desperate for at the moment, for example, this last year and a half, 2 years, it's been health, I think, on most people's minds. Then we begin to pray for health. And we begin to pray to God as the God who heals, which is not bad in and of itself. But I'll tell you that according to Rambam, this is the first step towards idolatry, towards avodah zarah. Because when we begin to dwell solely upon one aspect of God, or dwell on each aspect in turn, it becomes only a short step to think of those as being separate gods. And then we pray at the altar of health, and we pray at the altar of prosperity, we pray at the altar of joy. Right? We can pray to the god Apollo, the god of health, doctors and such in Greek times. We can pray to Bacchus, the god of joy and revelry. This is how the process works. If you see each facet, each element of life as part of the pantheon of forces that bring it about as being separate and distinct and needing to be placated and pleaded with differently, individually, and you actually begin to strip the good down to its component parts, and it's not so good anymore. Then it becomes true desperation, which is what idolatry always was about seeking control desperately over a world that is confusing and terrifying and uncertain, trying to find the levers that I can pull, the knobs I can twiddle that will guarantee me that I will have this jackpot of the things that I wish. There aren't different gods to pray to. There's only one. And goodness is all-encompassing. But how do we relax? How do we allow ourselves to have that peace and understanding that good is good enough, and that God, as God's totality, is enough, that we don't have to drill down into each element and try and extract all of it as we are desperate for. Well, the simple fact is we have to stop being afraid. I can hear you saying, how do you stop being afraid? There is so much to cause us fear. You stop being afraid by recognizing that you're not alone. The thing that makes most people anxious is not all of the problems of the world. Those aren't great, I agree. The thing that makes us anxious is the feeling that we are alone facing all of the problems of the world, or that it's maybe just me and my family facing the problems of the world. Isolated, huddling in our homes. This was one of the harshest parts of the lockdown in the last year, was feeling alone. At Temple Israel, we worked hard to try and help people not feel alone, but it is very, very difficult to penetrate in that way. But that is what the congregation is for. Right now, people are so desperate for affiliation, for attention, for feeling like they are part of something that will give them the strength to overcome all of the things that make them afraid, that they are desperate for different emblems of identity. Some people take it in ways that are fairly mundane. They may become very, very strong fans of a particular TV show, movie franchise. They may become very, very devoted fans of a sports franchise or sport altogether. I think much of the passion behind the Summer Olympics was partly in response for this. Something to feel like you are part of the team, like you are part of a group, that you are part of people sharing something. Some people do it through their political expression, and some people do it through more extreme expression. But it's all that same drive. I am afraid, I am alone, but if I join together with others, then I'll be okay. But what happens is when we make the object of our joining something as superficial as a media franchise or a sports team, no offense, then we misunderstand the nature of creation behind us and the nature of the Torah that God gave us to draw us towards God. God did not give us Torah so that we could have a wonderful cultural outing and experience through Judaism. God gave us Torah to let us know that you are never alone. You are never alone not only because you are always connected to God through the soul that God gave you, which made you human, but you are never alone because God made you part of Am Yisrael, the people of Israel. And our people have known for 2,000 years, spread across the globe as a diaspora, that we're not alone. Even the most alone and isolated Jew was never alone in his or her heart. Because a Jew that was on a boat in the middle of the Atlantic knew that there were other Jews in France, in Spain, in Morocco, in Yemen, in the New World, in the Old World, everywhere. And that should their boat wash up on the shore of some strange country, they could look and they would find other Jews, and they would find support, and they would find community, and they'd be okay. Think of how amazing that is, and ask yourself, do you feel that same way? If you were to be conked on the head, thrown into a trunk, driven to a strange part of the country, and escape and be on your own, do you know that you could turn to the Jews of that community, and they would be there for you? And do you know that if a Jew came staggering into your synagogue, into your place of business, and said, I saw the mezuzah on your door, I need help, do you know you'd be there for them? If you know that in your heart, that you would be there for them and they would be there for you, then how afraid can you be? What can this world do to us as long as we are us? This world can never take from us the joy of being a community and the strength that comes from that. It has tried for thousands of years to take it from us. And many, many people have unfortunately had to sacrifice their life in the face of those murderous attempts. But it has never succeeded. Because we recognize that God called us together to be together. Not to be individuals just worshiping God, but to be a minyan, to be a quorum, to be a kahilah, to be a community, to be an am, to be a nation. And forever we would be together. Sometimes we don't get to do it as much in person. This year, like last, reminded us of that acutely. But does that diminish the fire in our heart that burns for the connection of our community, for our people? Surely it should not. If that sense of togetherness can be maintained despite the centuries of dispersion, certainly it can be maintained with all of the tools we have to reach out and maintain the connection like we have tried to do over the last year. Has it been perfect? Of course not. But do you realize that we are still together? Do you realize that you are still here? Do you realize that as much as there may be a list of things that you wish to pray for in the coming year, that really all we have to pray for is that the new year be tova, that it would be good. Because we already have what we truly need to be safe, secure, to be at peace. We have each other. Anything else beyond that, yihye tov, it'll be good. And that's all we need, and that is what I wish you. Shana tova.